Joining me today are our two guests, Professor Mike Bruton, whose latest book titled Harambee, The Spirit of Innovation in Africa, and Richard Perez, director of the Hasso Plattner Institute of Design Thinking, the D School, the Design School at UCT, talking about not only building a future of design, innovation, invention in Africa, but also celebrating it. Mike, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. I've really been enjoying Harambee, the spirit of innovation in Africa. When I think of particularly South African innovations, I usually just go, what's the top of my mind? It's the creepy crawly. And you've written about a book dedicated to South African inventions, but you've now broadened the scope to the entire 45 countries of Africa, talking and writing about the innovation that comes out of this continent. What would be, if you could single out your most favorite innovation, invention, tool that has come out of this African continent?
Good morning, Lester. It's a pleasure being with you. Well, there's so many to choose from, and as I point out in the book, a characteristic of innovation in Africa is it operates at three levels: low tech, medium tech, and high tech. So there are choices in all three of those levels. But at the low tech one I really enjoyed in researching and writing about was a solution that cattle farmers in northern Botswana found to the problem of predation by lions from the Harambee Game Reserve. And they decided to use their knowledge of how wild animals deter predators by painting large eye spots on the rumps of their cattle. And they did a controlled experiment in collaboration with the university group and painted eye spots on 600 cattle, and 600 remained unpainted and 600 just had a cross on it. And after 3 years, they found that the cattle with eye spots, none of them had been taken by lions. So this simple experiment was highly effective. And, I think that's indicative of the innovative spirit that we find in Africa, and I think is encompassed by the Swahili word Harambee. Let's all pull together.
How much of local innovation, when I say local innovation, African innovation, comes from the traditional indigenous knowledge systems that have just been passed on for generation to generation? We may have little inkling idea of why it works, but we know from our own experiences that if we use a particular plant, it solves the problem of a particular ailment. And how does that speak to the African idea of innovation?
I think it's a very important foundation for innovation in Africa. I happen to have a great interest in it, so I've written extensively about that in the book. To me, indigenous knowledge is a knowledge system which is complementary to modern science. It doesn't compete with it, it complements and adds value to it. And there are many examples. In South Africa, for instance, rooibos tea has been used as an infusion for a healthy drink for centuries. It's now a worldwide commercial product. Honeybush tea, products from buchu, from kelp, from hudia or bittergaap, the slimming agent. So there are many examples of how indigenous knowledge has been taken to the market in modern commercial products. And there's a wonderful example in my book of a young lady, Matindi Masindi, who grew up in rural Kenya. Her father and uncles were all farmers, and she noticed that they use indigenous knowledge, for instance, when birds are migrating, insects are migrating, and so on, to predict important agricultural events. But she also realized that while she respected this knowledge, it didn't produce accurate predictions always. So she created an app for a smartphone called the Itiki Drought Predictor, which combined indigenous knowledge with modern meteorological data to improve the accuracy of those predictions. And she subsequently did a PhD at UCT on that, and she's currently employed at the Central University of Technology in the Free State. And her Itiki Drought Predictor has been further developed and is used throughout Africa. So it's a wonderful example of bringing indigenous knowledge and modern science together.
You spoke about low-tech innovation. It also goes up to high-tech innovation. Yeah. Many people, and we spoke to the South African National Space Agency last week in terms of South Africa's involvement in cube satellite technology, nanotechnology that they used in space exploration. We go from the very, very, grassroots to literally the sky is the limit. Shows the diversity of innovation on the African continent, and not just South Africa. Various other African countries also involved in the development, design, and research of these nano space satellites.
Absolutely. And Sunsat, produced by University of Stellenbosch, was one of our first microsatellites. But since then, 19 African countries have developed space programs, and most of them are have revolved around producing satellites that take images back on Earth and can be used to, promote agriculture, to manage resource use, etc. And I think that the most interesting high-tech innovation that I've mentioned in the book are the so-called Internet in the Sky balloons that are floating over Kenya. Because Kenya is such a mountainous country, it's very difficult to erect physical cell phone towers. So they've used these helium balloons, which hover in the sky in a geostationary orbit, as cell phone towers. So rural people in Kenya now have internet access through these internet in the sky balloons.
Well, what we've largely seen with, I'll say, Western innovation is that they are often developed to have very, very strong commercial capabilities, developing something, R&Ding something with the goal of it's going to be a commercial vehicle in the future. I don't necessarily see that, but I don't know if that is a good or a bad thing. We've largely seen innovation from the low to medium tech capability as largely benefiting communities and benefiting people. Whereas I see in other parts of the world, even the smallest development is used, what's the financial or the reward to this? I don't know if that should be a way of saying, well, if we add commercial development to this, it could fund other development. Or do we say, let's not explore commercial opportunities with our African innovations, because its utility should be enjoyed largely for free by the people of this continent. Your thoughts?
No, you're right. But there are two kinds of entrepreneurs: the social entrepreneurs and the commercial entrepreneurs. And Africa is particularly blessed with many social entrepreneurs who work in adverse environments and are not necessarily profit-orientated. They're developing innovations that benefit the widest range of people. And whereas the commercial entrepreneurs are really after it for the money. Now, obviously, we need both of them, but a good balance between social and commercial entrepreneurs and innovators is very important.
Richard, I hope innovation, science and technology hasn't failed us, and we have you on the line this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Lester. Can you hear me right now?
The technology works. Yes, I'm very, very happy. I hope you could hear our conversation with Mike, and we're talking about celebrating innovation in Africa. You run a innovation design school. That is where you are training the next inventors, the next engineers, the people who are going to invent the future. How do we inculcate that particular idea, that idea of innovation, particularly to younger Africans, South Africans? Of course, there's no lack of imagination. I remember me being a kid making little catapults and things simply because I had the imagination. I'm sure kids still do it now. My kid does science experiments with mud in the backyard, and that is a form of science and innovation. It's play, but it's also science, correct?
No, absolutely, Lester. And I think that the starting point really is sort of the message that we all, as human beings, have the ability to be creative and innovative. And as you mentioned, we start off young at preschool, playing, experimenting, building, and we sort of land up going through a bit of an educational system that separates those that are perceived to be creative and those that perhaps aren't. And those that are seen to be creative go through an educational system which enhances that natural creativity. And really what we are about as the D School is to say that as humans, we all have the capacity to be creative, irrespective of whether you're doing an engineering degree or humanities or social science. What makes us uniquely human is our ability to be creative. And what we really focus on at the D School is unlocking what we call creative confidence in people, so that we can give people an experience to illustrate that they do have that capacity to innovate, to maybe to become an entrepreneur. Maybe you don't want to start your own business, but at least have that ability to look at a challenge or look at a problem and come up with some creative solutions. And whether it's low tech or high tech, or whether you're in a corporate or whether you're in your own business, it's a critical skill that we're going to need of the future. And I think within the Africa context, there's just so much untapped talent. We have so many challenges that need resolving. And if we can capacitate every human being to be creative and look at the world through an innovative lens or a design lens, that would have a massive shift in our society.
I think many parents are, particularly of young children, we're trying to lay the foundation for whatever future interest, vocation, job, profession. Obviously, don't want to be prescriptive, don't want to be limiting. But when we entering into a school system, and this is our experience at the moment, there's everything from classes on mindfulness, which is important. There's everything from robotics, which is important. There is art and drama and dance, which is important. There's sport and physical activity, which is important. And that's also excluding all the academic subjects, which is important. We want to provide as much opportunity as possible and not limit at all. But as having a young child, how do you open them to as much opportunities, but also not overburden them and oversaturate them with so much stimulation that, that could be a hindrance from a design and innovation and a future-proofing point of view? What would be your advice to parents of young children?
Yeah, well, what we really try, so we don't try and sort of make this design thing, this creative thing, and add on an extra thing that you have to do. It's really about unlocking mindsets that we have naturally. And those mindsets talk to concepts of exploration, just getting people to explore more, to experiment more. And you can do that in a science class. You can do that on the rugby field or on the soccer field. It's just building that confidence to experiment or to explore. Another big part of, and as Mike mentioned, I think was the cattle farmers, this sort of bias to action, to actually trying something and see if it works, and embrace the sort of results of that experiment. And if it didn't work, what did you learn from it? At the D School, we teach people to embrace failure as part of a learning process. And so in a school system, if you don't get the marks you wanted in your science or your whatever subject, reflect on that and say, well, where did I fail? What worked? What didn't work? So I think you can build these mindsets into your everyday life. And I think for me, specifically for parents, it's important to get them to keep playing and keep exploring and keep making things. We don't make enough as human beings anymore. We sort of jump onto computers and get caught up in sort of technology, but we need to learn to make things. Like cooking, for example. Cooking is a creative process. You can really unlock creative confidence by being in the kitchen and making things. It's the kitchen in some ways is the ultimate makerspace. So I think it's how we build these mindsets into our everyday life is really the sort of the critical answer to it.
Mike, you're the former director of what was then called the MTN Science Centre. It's now the Cape Town Science Centre. It's one of my favorite spaces to spend with my kids, where we in a landscape where we're trying to direct particularly young girl children into STEM subjects. But how important is a space? And you're the former director of the space of the Science Centre. How important is that particular space to Cape Town and its kids? I think it's one of when I go, it's full, but I think it's sometimes a little bit underutilized. I think we need more space. We need more science centers. We need more innovation centers for kids to come play and experiment and build bricks and see them all collapse and fail and then try again. I absolutely love that space. Your connection with?
I think it's an absolutely essential facility in every city. Our motto is sort of playing is the first draft of life. It is a very, very important activity that children carry out. And, something that really irritates me is when parents say, stop wasting your time playing, come and watch TV. We really need to emphasize creativity in young people. And an important point to make is that creativity is usually associated with the arts, performing arts, music, dance, and so on. But it is very much a feature of science and technology as well. So scientists need to be creative. They need to have that spark within them to find new contexts to contextualize their findings and come up with new solutions. I think science centers are extremely important foundation in the education system because they can bring together experiments and people-centered activities and interactive displays that no single school can afford to have. So they're a resource that all schools can use.
Because, Richard, it doesn't need to be the zero-sum game between particularly when we look at tertiary subjects on whether you're in the social sciences versus whether you're in the entrepreneurial sciences or whether you're in the pure science, because that all forms part of innovation. It's equally important, for example, to have people develop brains so that they build cube satellites. But at the same time, the people who are, for example, waste pickers in our society, that's a form of innovation because they found a way of how to, one, earn an income. They've realized where to go to collect the scrap that we throw away. And then the larger macro product is that something like 90% of South African recycling is actually done by people who collect the waste that we throw away at home. That is equally part of a social science, which is a form of innovation. Doesn't need to be the zero-sum game of what is important in education. They are all equally important, and they're all equally part of innovation.
No, absolutely. You don't have to have a PhD to be an innovator. You need to have that confidence where I've identified a challenge or problem or an area of concern or something I want to change, and whether it's your own life or whether it's part of a business unit in a company. But it's just having that confidence to say, well, let me try this out. And it could lead to business, it could lead to a new product. So it's for us, it's really about building that confidence that everybody has this capability. We just got to unlock it.
Richard Perez, Director of the Hasso Plattner Institute of Design Thinking at the University of Cape Town. Also, Mike Bruton, he's the author of Harambee, Spirit of Innovation in Africa. He will be speaking today at the Iziko Museum in just about 2 hours' time at 11 o'clock. It's free for members of the Friends of the South African Museum, or you could donate 30 Rand if you're a non-member, and he'll be talking about his latest book, The Spirit of Innovation in Africa. Really, if you have a kid who's at home or not bunking school, but maybe has a day off and has the afternoon or mid-morning off, do go and visit. Go to the South African Iziko Museum. Mike, really appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks very much, Lester. It's a great pleasure.